What if a children's movie could teach us more about grief and healing than any adult film ever could? Pixar's Up isn't just a heartwarming adventure. It's a profound exploration of loss, hope, and the courage to move forward. At its core, Up contrasts two characters who've faced devastating loss. One clings to the past, sinking into despair, while the other learns to let go, finding the strength to rise, quite literally. It's this emotional journey that makes the film unforgettable and offers a lesson we all need. Grief can weigh us down, or if we channel it carefully, it can lift us up. But the emotional journey doesn't just stop there. There's a lot more symbolism hidden in Up. So how does a story about balloons, birds, a talking dog, and a floating house teach us to heal? Well, that all starts in the beginning of the movie. Right from the very get-go, we watched a young Carl Fredricksen look up with reverence at his hero, a passionate and intelligent young man who was undergoing the loss of all that was precious to him. That man was Charles Muntz. Charles Muntz lost his status and respect within the scientific community and set off to restore his name. In the meantime, the young Carl hopped over cracks and ran around town pretending to be an explorer. This shot wasn't placed in the film simply to make it visually more appealing. Rather, the animators were trying to give us a glimpse of the untainted wonder of a child, their love for and enchantment by this world. And the rest of the movie was about carefully guarding this inner spark against the torrent of hardships that life might throw our way. And that is why the childhood self of Carl Fredricksen was quickly replaced by the character of Russell. Russell wasn't just a random side character. Rather, when Russell came knocking on the door of Carl's house, he was actually knocking on the door of his heart to remind him about wonder, enchantment, and love for life. The things that he used to carry but had now pushed away. The reason the age difference between these characters was so significant, considering the message of the film, was that as we grow older, we tend to get heavier with our emotions. We tend to start to carry more and more weight from the setbacks of the past. Up was here to tell us to let it all go. The film basically established two launch pads, the trajectories of two main characters in their quest for somehow getting the past back, and doing so was equally difficult for both, just in different ways. It's never easy for anyone to let go of something that mattered greatly to them, but there is a time for grief, and I think that it's incredibly brilliant that Pixar used the trope of fridging in order to communicate the message of this film. And it wasn't just done once either. But before I explain that, let me quickly recap how the trope is defined. Here's something of note for writers who'd like to create a film like Up. Fridging is the act of killing off one of the main characters in a manner that causes the other one a great deal of anguish. Their death will actually set either the story or the character development arc of the other main protagonist in motion. So let me explain how Carl Fredricksen got launched into a character development arc that would make him a lot lighter and show us, the viewers, how to respond to the curveballs that life throws our way, and the bad hands that life deals us. As always, let's begin with the setting of the stage. Up 2009 begins in a quaint, picturesque suburb. There's a lot of greenery in the picture, and we watch the young Carl Fredricksen running around with a blue balloon in his hand. Although the color of the balloon represents grief, the small child has yet to experience any major heartbreak and can therefore hold grief without it weighing him down. He meets Ellie the same way that most of us meet the most special people in our life. Chance, coincidence, happenstance. But because she's also playing pretend as a wildlife explorer, something that Carl himself wants to become, and because she's so wildly passionate about life, they immediately become friends. Then, Carl has an accident, and when he's lying in bed recovering from it, Ellie floats him a red balloon. The color of this balloon is supposed to represent passion and enthusiasm for life. When Ellie climbs up into Carl's window, she shows him her dreams. She wants to go to Paradise Falls.
Adventure is out there!
Like Carl, she also idealizes Charles Muntz. The two bond, and their friendship soon blossoms into love. They get married. For the next 10 minutes, we watch them soar through life, everyday life, with a house, picnics, and mundane moments made beautiful together. Even here, the concept of loss was clearly demonstrated. Despite how desperately Ellie wanted children, we found out through the frames that she couldn't have them. Here, the film provided us with its first example of resilience, with Carl acting as a catalyst and support. Ellie embraced her loss and let go of her grief. Together, she and Carl reignited her childhood dream to go to Paradise Falls and began working towards it. Even though Ellie never managed to go there during her lifetime, this was still important. I'll mention why in just a moment. First, let me go back to what happens in the introductory sequence. After Ellie and Carl have managed to cope with the setback of not having children, it is now Carl's turn to directly experience grief. He loses Ellie, and we watched him cope with the anguish that this caused him by lovingly taking care of the house that the two of them spent their life in. But there's a reason this house was especially significant. See, Carl and Ellie were both adventurers, and people like those don't typically commit to a single house, street, or neighborhood. Rather, they become epic globetrotters who live more in transport contraptions than actual houses. We observe that with the other main character in the film. He spent over half his life in a blimp. I thought that Carl and Ellie committed to a regular life instead because not only did they find adventure in each other's loving presence, but also because this film was made for us. It was made to touch the hearts of everyone, not just those of us who have the same interests as our beloved protagonists. And when this sequence is finished, Carl opens the door to his house, which is now a small patch of land in the middle of a construction site. The reason this visual was so significant is because it showed us that Carl was holding on to the past while all else around him was changing. It's also worth noting that all of the buildings surrounding this house are skyscrapers. That is to say, they're all going up. People around him are moving on with their lives and going through the tumultuous and not so pretty process of change in order to reach new heights in their lives. Carl, however, is unprepared to let go. And I mean, we can empathize with that. Most of us will have at some point have had to bid farewell to something that mattered greatly to us, but have been unable to do so. Up tells us that no matter how colorful or beautiful the past may have been, we need to have the courage to move forward. Not doing so weighs down heavily on us, and that was surely the case with Carl. It was also the case with Charles Muntz. And to further explain how damaging that can be, for anyone who's lost something important, let me explore the depiction of grief with these two main characters, as well as a significant third one. So, Carl deals with his grief by spending all of his time in the house, with a lot of love to give and no one to give it to. He channels all of his energy into the house, but as we can clearly see, it's not exactly serving him. Sticking to his routine reminds him all the more of Ellie and makes it impossible for him to feel much else than his sadness at not being with her anymore. I mean, dude, the two of you had a good run. You'd been together since childhood and spent a lifetime together. Literally. At this point, you need to cherish your late wife's memories, but also get out there and continue to live. That's the least you owe your wife. The actions of Carl at the start of the movie, staying home and watching television in the dark, demonstrate that he's resentful over his loss. That's what's transformed him from a warm and happy man into a cranky and waspish curmudgeon. I mean, who shuts the door in the face of a cute little boy who's only trying to do exactly what you loved doing as a child? Especially when you have absolutely nothing else going on that day, or any day, for that matter.
The wilderness must be explored! Go, go! Roar!
This action, paired with the time that he whacks a guy in the head, shows us that he's, shall I say, losing it a little. And didn't we watch exactly that happen with another person in the story? Wasn't Charles Muntz, quite honestly, a deranged villain who'd grown frenzied by his past? If Muntz had simply accepted his loss and redirected his energies elsewhere, his whole life could have turned out a lot more differently. Instead, both characters locked themselves up in their respective chambers, one in a blimp and the other in the house, and mourned over what had passed them. Up showed us that whenever we hold on to grief so strongly and for so long, we begin to lose sight of what's right in front of us. Like with Months and the dog collars, and the resentment turns into anger and misdirected rage at the world. It can cause us to become a menace to society. Was it fair that Carl had to be a widower? No, nobody deserves that kind of pain, especially when they're too old to find someone new. Was it fair that Charles got stripped of his badge and was publicly humiliated? Also, no. He was a brilliant scientist who was obviously too far ahead of his time. But was it fair that Ellie should lose her chance at having children? Nope. Did she mourn over this for the rest of her life? Also, nope. And was it fair that Russell's father should have left him, become so irresponsible towards his own child that he couldn't even come and pin a badge on his boy? Absolutely not. But did Russell spend all of his time mourning and complaining about this? He did not. See, Up was trying to establish the difference between how children respond to loss versus who we adults tend to do it. Rather than sulking, Russell was trying to do what he cared about. And I think that the reason Russell tried so hard to befriend Carl was this. Even as a child, he understood that he couldn't heal in isolation, because his mother didn't seem to be the most supportive person in the world. He was looking for someone else to act as a catalyst to his healing. Carl had been that for Ellie in the past, when she first experienced the loss of her dream of children, and I feel that Russell probably sensed that somewhere deep down in Carl. The child could intuitively sense that beneath the old man's tough and disapproving exterior, he was really a big old softy on the inside. The introduction of Russell into the picture allowed for us to see healing in a kid-friendly manner. It added entertainment to the depth of the movie and made it relatable for all ages. But there's more to that. Did you know that oxytocin, the hormone that's responsible for feelings of love and bonding, is also released during times of stress? This is because, as human beings, we are not designed to heal in isolation. We are designed to heal with other people. When we turn inwards during grief, especially for prolonged stretches of time, it begins to morph itself into something much more sinister. The prolonged stress of it causes us to degenerate into a worse version of ourselves. That is why we need to heal with other people. Their joy will remind us of all the light that is still possible in this world despite the darkness that we have been through. That's precisely what Russell did with Carl. By stepping into his life with his big badge full of multicolored badges and his vivacious yellow Scouts shirt, he began to add humor and wit to the story. He also reminded Carl that humor and wit was still possible, that curiosity, imagination, and a love for life was still on the cards. Russell served not only as the launchpad to Carl's transformation, but also as the chief facilitator of it. By knocking on the door of his house once again, even when the house was probably 1,000 feet up in the air, Russell came in essentially to remind Carl that he'd been holding on to the past for far too long. And when Carl refuses to listen to him, well,
See? Cumulonimbus.
it's a metaphor. When we refuse to let light into our lives and when we refuse to listen or interact with others during times of sadness, dark clouds can fester over our souls. They've already done so with Charles Muntz, but Russell wasn't about to let that happen to Carl Fredricksen. That was why he resolutely stuck by him, come what may. Russell was there to assist Carl, literally. And incidentally, it was also Russell who found the ostrich peacock bird that started a new adventure in Carl's life and allowed him to begin letting go of the past. It was Russell's childhood wonder that allowed all of this to happen, and it was also Russell who greatly facilitated the completion of Carl's character development arc. This is because, as we saw, Carl did manage to get the house to Paradise Falls, but when he got there, he realized that there wasn't really that much there to it. Think about what would have happened if Russell hadn't been there. Carl would have floated the house over, landed it, and then spent the rest of his life in silence in a remote location that's near impossible to find, even for wilderness explorers. That's not life, and that is why Carl finding Ellie's note about her wish that he should go out there and find adventure was so important. And since Russell was Carl's only friend at that point, of course it was going to be with him. See, Carl didn't have a lot of passions of his own. Paradise Falls was not his dream, it was Ellie's. The children that they couldn't have were his dream later and Ellie's first. Carl was simply someone who loved to care for others, and that is why he needed Russell in his life, so that he could have somebody to care for. And this worked out perfectly because Russell also needed a father figure, or someone to look up to. If Carl hadn't opened his heart and had the courage to start off a new adventure with Russell, I'm pretty sure that he would have ended up being a lot like Muntz. I mean, sure, Carl was good at understanding physics, specifically aerodynamics, but even building a whole new floating house in Paradise Falls wouldn't have filled the gaping hole in his heart. It didn't do it for Muntz, it wouldn't have done it for Charles. We all need love in our lives, and Carl was fortunate enough to find it with Russell. He was able to act as a father to someone even though he didn't have children of his own. And that was what healed him from his pain. In this way, there was a symbolic gratification in seeing how Carl's first loss came round in a full circle, in a new and evolved form to help him move on. But that wasn't the only symbolic representation in the film. As I've mentioned before, Up was full of metaphors, parables, and symbols, like the house and the balloons. The house in Up represents Carl's emotional anchor. It showcases repeatedly the fact that he's clinging desperately to the past. In the case of Muntz, the Zeppelin, Spirit of Adventure, serves the same purpose exactly. The balloons, on the other hand, represent hope and color. They show us how incredibly powerful hope can be, that it can uplift even the heaviest of grieving hearts. Muntz didn't have balloons. In fact, the only colorful thing in his life was the ostrich peacock bird that he'd been chasing for 6 decades. And because the sightings of it, the thing with the feathers and hope, were so rare, few and far in between, he was beginning to lose himself. Besides, Muntz didn't have a person to talk to. All he had were talking dogs. And being loyal companions, they could only act as extensions of him rather than as real friends. Ones that would force him to confront the truth and change his ways the way that Russell did with Carl. That was part of the tragedy for him. Of course, the fact that nobody forced their way into his life early on his grief in order to help him let go. He did find a couple of explorers later, but by then he had already gone crazy enough to allow the darkness that was in his heart to take over much more strongly. In Carl's case, letting go of the house left him high up in the clouds and allowed him to start life afresh. The old was bid adieu to, and the new was made room for. All of this, of course, was a choice. That's what Up was trying to tell us, that we must choose to move on in life. There are still moments for us to experience. There are still places we need to go to, people that we need to meet, and conversations that we need to have, even after everything that we've been through. And who knows, if we're brave enough, maybe one day we'll be in a remote location where dogs are wearing multilingual translation collars that help them communicate with you and I. The use of dialogue in Up, especially considering the fact that dogs could speak, was done carefully. The most impactful sequences had little to no words in them at all. For instance, the entire sequence about Carl and Ellie's married life, and the sequence in which Carl opens Ellie's adventure book and reads her note to him, both did not contain any dialogue. This is because silence is a lot more effective while delivering messages from a poignant theme. That's something the writers among you could make note of. The use of body language and visuals rather than direct dialogue during moments of emotional intensity ensures that we're a lot more connected to the characters' feelings during that time. Let's discuss some of the other tools that Up used in order to drive the film's message home to us. Like I said before, unpacking all of this made me realize just how much work went into creating this film. In my opinion, the reason Up was so successful as a film is that it struck a careful balance between the profoundness of the emotional theme of the film and the vibrance that it used. Throughout the film, we saw warm tones, comic relief in characters like the dogs, and moments of immense risibility. They managed to pair all of this wonderfully with the core message of the film. I'd like to break that down a bit. Up's Oscar-winning soundtrack by Michael Giacchino, Married Life, is used repeatedly through the film, and it may have made some of us shed a few tears. Not me, though. We all felt the way the masterful track accentuated the depth and nuance of certain moments in the movie. Because of this, we were able to connect deeply with the characters, including both Carl as well as Russell. Furthermore, the visuals changed hues along with the theme of the scene. For instance, Ellie and Carl's life was showcased in warm golden colors, whereas these became muted as Ellie's death approached. We also watched Carl in the beginning of the film watch television in complete darkness, despite the day being bright and sunny outside. This helped us understand how forgotten and empty he felt. And then, even though the general terrain of Paradise Falls was arid and desert-like, to represent the hollowness that Carl was feeling inside his heart, the animators still managed to switch the scenes. By showcasing dense, verdant forest spaces in addition to this rocky terrain, we were able to understand two contrasting sides of life, one being lush and full of life, and the other being arid and empty. Also, of course, there was the use of sounds. Other than the absolutely hilarious way in which Russell communicated, launching into unstoppable monologues every now and then, the animators also gave us a laugh through the collar on the scariest dog in the bunch.
Soon enough the bird will be ours yet again. Find the scent, my compadres, and you too shall have much rewardings from Master.
Because Pixar intertwined humor with emotional depth in Up, they were able to make the film palatable not only for children but also adults. But isn't it so that grief can find us at any time? We don't need a multilingual translation collar in order to comprehend grief. It's very obvious and easy to recognize, especially for those of us who have already become acquainted with it. The reason that Up was such an amazing movie was that it gave us a clear direction about how to respond to the setbacks in our lives. And the reason they made it a kids' film was so that children could begin to grasp this concept early on in life. It was a soft nudge or introduction of a potent concept for younger minds. That way, it would be a lot easier for them to navigate through the turbulent waters that we sometimes have to sail our way across. Through the introduction of grief early on in Russell's life, the film was able to show us that pain can find us at any time. The only thing that we can do is to accept it and move on. We watched the film position the healing of Russell and Carl in tandem with each other. This intergenerational exchange of love further helped us understand that a passion and fervor for life needs to be maintained across all ages, regardless of one's circumstances. The film continuously used vivacious characters such as Ellie, Russell, and even Kevin to lighten and make more acceptable the emotive power and narrative weight that it carried. It further managed to enhance the core expression through the use of character design. I've already explained why Russell wore a yellow Scouts shirt, but let's take a look at the other characters and how their designs give us subconscious cues about what the film is trying to showcase to us. In this way, they brought him back to life. To be honest, the use of the colorful motif trope was done brilliantly in Up. Let's start off with Carl, shall we? When he's younger, he's dressed in an adventurer's outfit. This signifies his lighthearted and playful nature at the time. Later on, though, he wears a modest traditional brown suit. This choice of attire is supposed to show us that Carl doesn't care to be seen and would rather remain imperceptible. He's almost trying to look like an archive. Russell, on the other hand, is bursting with color. His bright yellow shirt, orange neck scarf, green pants, and big belt full of badges demonstrate inherent vitality and a thirst for life. And then, of course, there was Kevin. The bird's bright plumage and bubbly nature stood out in direct contradiction to the muted nature of everything that Carl was wearing and doing. Together, Russell and Kevin were supposed to get rid of Carl's grief. The light of their joy was supposed to erase the shadows of Carl's despair. I'm so glad they managed to do so. The final reason that Up is such an impressive film is that it demonstrates the process of healing as gradual. Carl doesn't immediately dispel his anguish and embrace life anew. In fact, he spends the first half of the film resisting the joy and brightness that life seems to be bombarding him with. But the fact that he manages to make the choice to live on helped us understand that we too need to do the same. I still sometimes tear up when I'm rewatching this film, but I make it a point to keep rewatching it every few years so that I don't forget how important it is for me to keep holding on to hope, and so that I don't allow for things to weigh me down. What did you all think of this movie? Was there any special moment that resonated the most with you? Let me know in the comments. Lastly, this video was different from the ones that I regularly do, so I'd love to hear what you all thought of it. Are there any other movies that you would like for me to review this way? And of course, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Until next time.